September 15, 1940. Tokyo, Japan. The Prime Minister's office was thick with cigarette smoke. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto crushed out his third lucky strike of the meeting. The American tobacco was a small irony that nobody missed. Around the table sat Japan's most powerful military leaders, men who believed the empire was destined to rule Asia. They were discussing war with the United States. Yamamoto had been quiet most of the meeting, listening to confident predictions about quick victory. Now they wanted his opinion. He was, after all, the Navy's most senior officer, the man who would have to fight this war at sea. Yamamoto looked at each face around the table, then he spoke words that would haunt Japan for the next 5 years. If we go to war with America, I can promise you victories for 6 months, maybe a year. After that, I have no confidence. We will lose. The room went silent. Some officers looked angry. Others confused. How could their top admiral say such a thing? Japan's military had never lost a war. They had defeated China. They had defeated Russia in 1905. They were unbeatable. One general asked the question everyone was thinking. "Admiral, why do you say this? Do you doubt the fighting spirit of our men?" Yamamoto shook his head. "Our men are the finest in the world, but this war will not be won by spirit alone. It will be won by steel and oil and factories, and America has more of all three than we can imagine." He pulled out a folder of notes and began to explain, but he could see it in their eyes. They did not want to hear this. They had already made up their minds. Yamamoto knew something the other officers did not. He had lived in America, not as a tourist, but as a student and a military officer. From 1919 to 1921, he studied at Harvard University. From 1926 to 1928, he served as a naval officer in Washington. He had traveled across America, visiting factories, oil fields, steel mills, and shipyards. He had seen things that terrified him. In Pennsylvania, he toured steel factories that produced more metal in 1 month than all of Japan's mills produced in a year. In Texas, he visited oil fields where natural gas was burned off as waste because there was so much of it. The flares lit the night sky for miles. Japan carefully saved every drop of imported fuel. America had so much they burned it for nothing. This casual waste, more than any military demonstration, convinced Yamamoto that fighting America was suicide. In Detroit, he watched automobile factories. The assembly lines moved with mechanical precision. Workers built cars at a pace that seemed impossible. One factory produced more vehicles in a week than Japan's entire auto industry made in months. Yamamoto understood immediately. These same factories could build tanks, planes, and military trucks. America's industrial power was not just bigger than Japan's, it was in a different universe. He wrote detailed reports and sent them to Tokyo. He explained the numbers. America produced 60% of the world's oil. Japan had almost none and relied on imports. America made 5 million cars per year. Japan made fewer than 50,000. America's steel production was 10 times larger. The mathematics were brutal and clear. Japan could not win a long war against such an enemy. His reports were filed away and mostly ignored. The military leaders in Tokyo did not want to hear about factories and oil. They wanted to hear about honor, spirit, and destiny. They believed Japanese warriors were superior to soft Americans. They believed one Japanese soldier was worth 10 Americans. They believed Japan's divine mission would overcome any material disadvantage. Yamamoto knew better. He had met Americans. He had watched them work. They were not soft. They were practical, efficient, and unbelievably productive. When Americans decided to do something, they did it with machine-like determination. And if war came, they would bring all that industrial power to crush Japan. In his reports, he tried to explain this. The Americans think differently than we do. While we perfect our battleships, they are building the infrastructure for air power. They have aluminum production, engine technology, and most importantly, The ability to build aircraft by the thousands, we cannot match this. His warnings were largely ignored. By December 1941, Japan's military leaders had made their decision. They would attack Pearl Harbor and seize Southeast Asia's oil fields and resources before America could react. They believed America was weak, that Americans loved comfort too much to fight a long war. They believed one sharp blow would make America negotiate for peace. Yamamoto knew this was fantasy, but he was a military officer. When ordered to plan the attack, he did his duty. He planned the Pearl Harbor operation with brilliant precision, but he told his staff privately, "We will win the first battles, then we will lose the war." The attack on Pearl Harbor succeeded beyond anyone's hopes. 8 American battleships were sunk or damaged. More than 2,400 Americans died. Across Japan, people celebrated. Military leaders talked about marching to victory. Newspapers declared the Americans were beaten, but Yamamoto did not celebrate. He reportedly told his staff, "I fear all we have done is wake a sleeping giant and fill him with terrible resolve." His words were prophetic. For 6 months, Japan won victory after victory. They conquered the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, Burma, and the Dutch East Indies. They seemed unstoppable. Then came June 1942. The Battle of Midway happened exactly 6 months after Pearl Harbor, just as Yamamoto had predicted. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers were sunk in one day. Japan's naval air power, carefully built over years, was destroyed in hours. After Midway, Japan never won another major battle. Yamamoto's prediction had come true with eerie precision. 6 months of victories, then nothing but retreat and defeat. But even Midway did not wake up Tokyo's military leaders. They still believed in ultimate victory. They still ignored the numbers. They still thought spirit could beat steel. Through 1942 and 1943, Yamamoto sent more reports. He explained what was happening. America was building ships faster than Japan could sink them. In 1942 alone, American shipyards launched more tonnage than Japan had built in the previous 10 years. America was producing planes at rates that seemed impossible. By 1943, American factories were building 8,000 aircraft per month. Japan's entire aircraft industry made fewer than 2,000 per month. The gap was growing every day. Yamamoto documented these numbers and sent them to Tokyo. He begged the government to seek peace while Japan still had bargaining power. He warned that continued war would destroy the nation. His reports were read and filed. Nothing changed. The military government decided to fight on. They built their strategy on hope and mythology. They hoped American will would break. They believed divine wind would protect Japan. They told the people victory was certain. Yamamoto knew it was a lie. On April 18, 1943, Yamamoto was flying from Rabaul to inspect troops in the Solomon Islands. American codebreakers had intercepted his travel plans. 16 P-38 fighter planes were sent to intercept him. They shot down his aircraft over Bougainville Island. Yamamoto died instantly when the plane crashed into the jungle. He was 59 years old. When news reached Tokyo, the government declared a day of national mourning. They praised him as a hero who had delivered victory at Pearl Harbor, but they ignored everything else he had tried to tell them. They ignored his warnings about American industrial power. They ignored his predictions about Japan's inevitable defeat. They continued fighting a war they could not win. After Yamamoto's death, other officers tried to warn Tokyo. Colonel Masanobu Tsuji, an army intelligence officer, wrote detailed reports about American firepower after observing battles in the Pacific. He described how American forces used overwhelming artillery, air support, and naval guns to destroy Japanese positions. He explained that Japanese soldiers, no matter how brave, could not survive such bombardment. His reports were labeled defeatist and ignored. Captain Atsushi Oi, a naval staff officer, compiled statistics on shipping losses. By mid-1943, American submarines were sinking Japanese cargo ships faster than they could be replaced. Japan's economy depended on imported oil, rubber, and raw materials. Without ships to transport these supplies, factories would stop, and the military would run out of fuel. Oi's reports were detailed and accurate. They were also ignored. Lieutenant General Torashiro Kawabe, Vice Chief of the Imperial Army General Staff, tried to present realistic assessments of Japan's military situation. After the fall of Saipan in July 1944, he argued that Japan should seek peace terms immediately. Saipan's loss meant American B-29 bombers could now reach Tokyo. Continuing the war would only bring destruction to Japan's cities and people. His recommendation was rejected. The military government decided to fight to the death. They called it the decisive battle strategy. They believed one massive victory could still turn the war around. The pattern repeated throughout the war. Officers who understood the real situation tried to warn their superiors. They presented facts, numbers, and honest assessments. They were ignored, silenced, or removed from their positions. The military leadership preferred comforting lies to uncomfortable truths. By 1945, the situation was desperate. American B-29 bombers were burning Japanese cities to ashes. On March 9–10, 1945, the firebombing of Tokyo killed approximately 100,000 people in a single night. More people died in that one raid than in the atomic bombing of Nagasaki later that year. Yet still, the government refused to surrender. Officers who suggested negotiating for peace were accused of treason. The official position remained that Japan would fight to the last man, woman, and child. It took 2 atomic bombs, dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, to finally force surrender. Even then, some military officers tried to stage a coup to prevent the emperor's surrender broadcast. After the war, American occupation forces interviewed surviving Japanese military leaders. They asked why Japan had continued fighting when defeat was obvious. The answers were revealing and depressing. Most officers admitted they had known the war was lost by 1943 or early 1944, but they felt they could not say so publicly. Japanese military culture did not allow for admitting defeat. Officers who suggested surrender or negotiation would be seen as cowards. Their families would be disgraced. Some might even be assassinated by fanatics. So they stayed silent and let the war continue. They let cities burn. They let hundreds of thousands of soldiers die in hopeless battles. They let American bombers destroy the nation, all because they could not admit the truth. The documents captured after the war showed that Yamamoto's predictions had been accurate in almost every detail. His estimate of 6 months of victories was exact. His warnings about American industrial power were proven correct by overwhelming evidence. His plea to avoid war or seek early peace was vindicated by Japan's total defeat, but none of it mattered because nobody had listened. The tragedy of Yamamoto's warnings is not that he was ignored by stupid men. The officers who dismissed his reports were intelligent, educated, and experienced, but they were trapped by their own beliefs. They believed in Japanese superiority so deeply that no amount of evidence could change their minds. They believed victory was destiny, that spirit could overcome material advantage, that giving up was worse than dying. These beliefs made it impossible for them to hear the truth. Intelligence officers who tried to present realistic assessments were seen as defeatist. Staff officers who pointed out Japan's weakening position were accused of spreading panic. Anyone who suggested peace negotiations was labeled a traitor. The culture of the military made honest discussion impossible. This led to catastrophic decisions. The decision to fight on after Midway, when negotiated peace, might still have been possible. The decision to defend every Pacific island to the last man instead of conducting strategic retreat. The decision to continue the war through 1944 and 1945, when every indicator showed Japan was being destroyed. Each decision was made by men who refused to accept reality. The cost of these decisions was measured in cities destroyed, civilians killed, and soldiers sent to die in battles that could not be won. Tokyo's leaders kept telling the people that victory was near, that secret weapons would turn the tide, that American will was breaking. None of it was true. The war ended with Japan in ruins, occupied by foreign troops for the first time in its history. Yamamoto had seen it all coming. He had tried to warn them in 1940, before the war started. He had tried again in 1941, before Pearl Harbor. He had sent reports throughout 1942 and early 1943, begging for realistic assessment. Every time, he was ignored or dismissed. His death in April 1943 removed the one voice senior enough to challenge the government's fantasy. After that, no one dared speak the truth. The lesson of Yamamoto's warnings is not just about World War II. It is about what happens when leaders refuse to hear unwelcome truths, when organizations punish honest assessments and reward comfortable lies, when culture makes it impossible to admit mistakes or change course. Japan's military leaders were not evil men. Most genuinely believed they were serving their country. But they created a system where truth could not be spoken, where facts were ignored if they contradicted belief, where admitting error was impossible. That system led them to make decisions that destroyed their nation. Yamamoto understood this. In his final letters to friends, written shortly before his death, he expressed deep pessimism about Japan's future. He knew the war was lost. He knew the destruction would be terrible, but he also knew no one would listen to him. He had tried to warn them. They had chosen not to hear. Now all he could do was his duty and wait for the inevitable end. When researchers after the war studied Japanese decision-making, they found Yamamoto's reports filed away, unread and gathering dust. His predictions, now proven accurate, had been ignored at the time. His warnings about American power, now validated by crushing defeat, had been dismissed as defeatist. The evidence he had gathered, now confirmed by captured American production records, had been rejected as impossible. Everything he had tried to tell them was true, and none of it had mattered. That is the real tragedy of the story, not that Japan lost the war. That was inevitable once they chose to fight America. The tragedy is that it did not have to happen. Yamamoto had shown them the path. He had explained the costs. He had begged them not to start a war they could not win. They started it anyway. They ignored every warning, dismissed every fact, and rejected every honest assessment. Then they acted surprised when everything Yamamoto predicted came true. The officer who tried to warn Tokyo about American firepower was ignored in his time, vindicated too late, and remembered as the man who saw the truth that no one wanted to hear.